You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast.
Welcome to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 333. And with me today is Andrew Kinkella in Southern California.
Hello, everyone, and welcome.
And that's it. Just the two of us.
Just two.
Everybody else, we're the ones without the lives. Everybody else is off gallivanting, doing things with their families and whatnot.
Whatever. Yeah.
Today, we're going to talk about building your skill set outside of archaeology. And I know people are going to say, well, why should I have to do that? Well, because more and more now, some of the, these smaller companies are getting gobbled up by the bigger companies. And you need to be relevant. And you need to make sure that you have the skills that when, archaeology work, field work, whatnot, starts drying up, you have the skills to withstand and keep your full-time job. And that's reality, whether you like it or not. Also, it's kind of fun. It's fun to learn new things. And finally, the third big reason to me is it really opens up your understanding. So as archaeologists, we're studiers of past societies, past cultures. And so, it's such a broad spectrum of what we have to understand that having that knowledge from other disciplines really helps you be a better archaeologist. And I got a couple examples. So when I first started, I did a survey out in 29 Palms, and I was working my way through graduate school. And while I was working my way through graduate school, I had multiple jobs. One of my jobs was I taught upholstery. And I had been doing upholstery for a while. And I was teaching an adult class, and it was just about a full-time job. And we were walking through 29 Palms on BLM land, and we were running into various, the things you run into, right? A lot of the historics. And some of them were old chairs, old furniture, but also old upholstery and old implements from cars, but specifically the upholstered areas. And it's funny because you would never think that as an upholsterer that I would have, my background in upholstery actually helped me with archaeology. And we were able to actually date a site based on, a range date, based on some very specific tools and very specific implement or elements of the upholstered portions of cars and furniture based on my knowledge, because believe it or not, there's some things that were very uniquely during certain periods of time. And, that's kind of like a way out there example, but I think sometimes it's helpful to have a extreme example to prove the point. And, another example is, there are times when you have to, all of us have done it, when you have to train others to help you in the field, to be those laborers in the field because you have a huge effort. So we brought in geologists, and it's an adjacent discipline. And we showed them, we were having them teamed up with archaeologists to excavate, to do subsurface testing, actually. And their soil descriptions were incredible. They were so much better than anything I would have done. And they were maybe a little more detailed than they had to be, but we were able to dial it back. And we ended up having the best soil profiles I've ever seen. So, this is just a couple of examples. So today we're going to talk about what are those skill sets that if you're an environmental firm, engineering firm that has other disciplines, what are some skill sets that would be good to see if you can, gather that capability. Makes you more billable, but it also, like I said, helps you with your perspective on archaeology. And it's just nice to learn new things. So, Andrew, what do you think about that? Just to start off with, as a
no, there's a lot there. And I know that we'll kind of talk and wiggle through this as we always do, but I definitely want to make sure we get back to that billable aspect that you were talking about. You know what I mean? Like, yes, we can talk about our various skill sets, but how does this, how's this ultimately billable and this kind of stuff? So obviously we're talking about first, very specific knowledge, right? Do you have super specific knowledge? Heather's example was, in upholstery, right? I also happen to know a lot about cars. So I have a very specific knowledge of like old cars. I could notice very old car parts, this kind of stuff, just because I've spent a life, especially with my father way back, fixing old, crappy, hopefully they run cars. So I have all this like side knowledge on that. But another thing I wanted to talk about in terms of just sort of getting employed in the first place with your specific skill set, this is a little to the side, but I think it goes with it. I'm going with not only have very specific knowledge in these little tiny focused arenas, but also know people who are rich. And what I mean by that is every so often you'll have an opportunity to be in an area, like in a room or in a meeting with like the movers and shakers. You know what I mean? Of an area. Is it a board meeting of some kind? Is it some sort of city council meeting of some kind? My point with that is, when in doubt, go to those, right? And I'm not saying you have to shove your way in, but you'll see as an archaeological professional, you'll be invited to some of this stuff from time to time. We're doing this presentation here. Go, because you're going to make the coolest, most interesting contacts. My example with this happened when I was much younger, and I happened to be a lifeguard. And you're like, what does this have to do with archaeology? But stick with me. So I was a pool lifeguard at the Montecito YMCA. And if anybody knows where Montecito, California is, it is the rich area of Santa Barbara. Yeah, that
like
rich.
Santa Barbara's not rich enough, but
yeah, no, not for me. I'm Montecito or go home. And for Montecito is where like Oprah lives. It's that. It's
Prince
there.
Harry, Meghan Markle.
Exactly. Yeah. And I even have a side story about the Harry Meghan Markle thing. But anyway, so it was funny because it's just a YMCA, but it's all the rich people from there, right? Who would come. So they treated it like a country club, but I'm making minimum wage as a lifeguard. Anyway, there was a guy who went there who would swim like every day. He was the coolest guy. And we got to talking. I told him I was into archaeology. He's like, oh, you're into archaeology. I'm like, yeah. He's like, I'm a conservator. I have my own conservator business here in Santa Barbara, and I need somebody to help me with some of the artifacts that we're working with. And I'm like, great. So I picked up a side gig working for an art conservator on some artifacts that happened to go with some of the collection. So I wasn't there like working on Rembrandts or something. I was working on actual archaeological artifacts because he had to deal with artifacts as well. But that kind of thing doesn't happen when you're just walking down the street. Right. It can happen. Or when you
stay in your class, or when you say, I'm only going to do archaeology and I'm going to do that or bust. Right. I'm not going to be open to other opportunities. And I think that's starting to go away in our discipline, or at least more and more. I mean,
I think so too. Yeah.
People are a little bit more open, but that's awesome. That's an awesome example, because right there, you gain that skill as far as conservation, whatever it was that you were doing, even if you just did it for a summer.
That's exactly what it was. It was a summer. And it was very similar to your example of geology, because even just like geology is a sister field to archaeology, or it's right next to it, so of course, art conservation is going to be very close too. And I just noticed how in the art world, they organized and conserved certain things. And I was like, whoa, this is a little different. It was a learning experience. I used some very noxious chemicals to conserve some stuff. But I'm like, wow, this is how they do that. This is the way that this is done in this world. And if I was ever in a position in my archaeology life that was similar, I could use that skill set in archaeology,
Right. I think, I'll give one more example, and then we'll go to the second segment and actually talk about some skills that you could focus on. Yeah. But, another example is when I'm hiring and I see somebody who has any kind of military, background, or even if they did junior ROTC in high school, any of that, to me, those skills are so important because, first of all, they know how to use a compass typically.
Yeah.
They have to. They know what it's like to work in really unpleasant conditions. It's that term, embrace the suck, right?
Yeah.
And, we don't stress that enough in archaeology. Like we're out in the boonies, we're out in areas that are not comfortable to be in. Not always, but a lot of times we are. And, you got to embrace the suck. Sometimes you have to just really, you have to say, okay, this is part of the deal, and actually enjoy it.
Right.
It gives you, I guarantee you, being an archaeologist and doing things that are uncomfortable are going to give you a lot better stories to tell your grandchildren than, sitting at a desk for your entire career. So as much as it's uncomfortable and maybe not, it's not fun at the time, in the long run, it's essential to archaeology, and having that ability to withstand, the hard environments and to just keep moving is really important, along with, of course, the organizational skills, the ability from a military perspective to, look at a problem and find a solution immediately, as quickly as possible. And all those skills are really important. So that's one more. We used to use some ROTC cadets and those that were, interested in archaeology, and had them do, appropriate field work, and always supervised by archaeologists. And they were terrific. They were amazing. Yeah, they were awesome to work with. So I think with that, we're going to go to the next segment, and we'll talk specifically about what are some skills that you wouldn't even think about as an archaeologist that would be good to add to your toolbox. And we'll be right back. Welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 333. And today we're talking about expanding our skill set past archaeology to ensure billability, I would say.
Yeah.
And really, there's other reasons, but the main thing is you want to make sure that you are the guy, the girl, the gal that can be the go-to when some of the work starts drying up. And, we always talk about archaeology, make sure that you're a good writer, make sure that you can do other things in the lab, all that. But you know what? Like without field work, there is no writing. So let's just be clear. It's good. Sometimes you might have a large data recovery that happened when the snow wasn't on the ground, but then that lab work's only going to last so long. That writing is only going to last so long. It's not going to take you through to the next, in some areas of the country, in the world, not going to take you to the next, field season. So what can you do? And this, this isn't maybe we'll talk about larger companies, and we'll talk about the smaller companies. So First of all, larger companies, engineering and environmental companies. There are so many different services. So if you look at your company's website and look at their services tab and see all the services that they're doing, one thing I would suggest, and I'll give you specific examples, but one thing I would suggest is start reaching out to those leads and say, hey, listen, I want to make sure I'm as valuable to this company as possible. I'm open to learning new skills. And these are the skills that I do have, these broad skills, not like I can dig up a 1x1 in this amount of time, or I could dig a amount of time, because they're not going to understand that. But bring it out like 10,000 feet and say, I can do this and this. And we can talk about that at the end.
Oh, and I just want to break in for a second. And I would also say, ask them, what skills do they need? You know what I mean?
Next step.
And really narrow it. Like, is there a top 3 skills that you wish I had?
Right. And they may not even realize how much overlap there is between what you do and what they need. And so one example is, I think most people wouldn't even think about noise. So acoustics. Right. So both like in California, we'll say, but in California or even on NEPA projects, and this is becoming a bigger deal for data center projects, is the noise component. So noise readings. They have to do a base level reading prior and then after, and many times there's mitigation afterwards that requires that readings are conducted to make sure the noise level isn't going past a certain decibel, and you have both the construction and the operations. And so this could be long-term work for you. And doing noise readings isn't that difficult. We actually train our people on how to do that so that when we need, because the one thing is that's one of those tasks that must be done at the project site, right? So you can't have one person who's, just does the noise readings in every single area that a company has, an office, or
Right.
every area where you have projects. That's just not possible. So you need to train people that are multifunctional. And one of those things, there's no reason why an archaeologist could not do that. And in fact, you can couple it with a survey. So if you had the cultural survey that needs to be done, there's no reason why you couldn't also do the noise readings. So it's not difficult to learn. That's just one example. Another is geotechnical testing and geotechnical. Now, you're not going to be the soil scientist that's there, but you can certainly collect. There's stormwater sampling. There's lots of different things that you can do because you as an archaeologist, our bread and butter is collecting data in the field efficiently, quickly, and in lots of different types of environments. And that happens in many of these other disciplines that require this field collection.
Yeah, just a handful of things here. First, just as a side note, I'm like, my brother is an audio engineer. Could he work in archaeology on the side? I'm like, oh my God, he actually has that skill set already. A couple other skill sets. It's funny that, Heather, you brought up geotechnical. One, I always say, I'm like, just get knowledgeable about geology, right? Geology just always helps you. And actually from a small company side, my experiences were much more with small companies than big ones. Geology seemed to be the number one thing that they wished people knew more of. Can you do the geology of this? Can you deal with, this geological situation? Because so often, of course, in projects, they dig beneath the cultural layer, but other stuff might be still going on. Can you collect these fossils or something like this? Anyways, so, if you know more on that's good. Another one that comes up a lot, and Heather, I'm really curious to get your take on this, is GIS. And what I am going to say, this is sort of my hot take. This is just from my experience. I would say that GIS to me is kind of all or nothing, meaning in archaeology, they want you for GIS if you have a full-on GIS certification, or if you have a full-on double major in GIS. If you take one class in GIS, I don't know if that really gets you much. I think it's actually smart to do so you understand GIS. I would recommend you take a class in GIS, but not thinking, oh, I have one class, now I will be the GIS person on a project. Heather, is that your experience?
Yeah, so I went back for a second master's in GIS with the idea that it was, and that was when it was a big thing, people that have these dual masters or at least, a certificate or whatever in GIS. And the one thing about GIS is that it moves so quickly.
Yeah.
And, what I knew and what I went to school with is completely, I was just talking to the lead of our digital solutions team. And when I told him when I was in graduate school for GIS, and I said, I'm sure my knowledge is obsolete, he kind of laughed yeah, it is. But it definitely helps. I understand, and he agreed. I understand the context of GIS. I understand what it can do in the bigger picture, and I understand how it can help us as archaeologists. And I could still put together a figure if I had to. It's not the highest and best use of my time, but there's a difference. I think people are getting a little bit more savvy, but if you're an early stage student, I'd like to just let you know that, when it comes to GIS and archaeology, in a smaller firm, you're going to be very helpful with creating figures. And those figures, that's not GIS analysis. It's literally, making a glorified map. You're not doing analysis. You're putting the pieces together. You're using a tool, ArcGIS, to create a figure that we put in our reports. It's just putting pieces together and making it presenting it in a manner that's easy for the reader to consume.
Yeah, glorified Photoshop.
Right. So it's not GIS analysis, and that doesn't take a whole lot of work. For a small company, that's absolutely helpful. Yeah. But when you move into a medium size to large company, even a large or small company, I know I'm talking like in the hundreds of people, which would not, in the grand scheme of things, be considered a smaller company, but it's not like 50, right? So you have dedicated GIS teams. And those GIS teams are, they're very protective of what they're doing. And they're protective of the amount of work that comes in, because they're hiring people based on the work that they anticipate coming in. And if the ARC team is taking that work, that's not good. And it's hard for them to gauge. The second thing is they want the figures to look the same across the company. So, that, and in order to do that, you have to be working with the GIS team. So on a lot of these companies, that GIS team is on lockdown. It's very difficult to break in and start doing, figures for them. And it's not going to be as easy. And so I'm just saying, like, if you're in a larger company or even a medium size or a larger, smaller company, those GIS, you're really not going to be using your GIS capabilities. So don't think that it used to be that, oh, this is a done deal. Like, get your certificate and you're going to be doing GIS. It depends on where you work, period.
Yep.
So I do think GIS is good. I think every archaeologist should take a few classes just so that they understand it. But it's not what it was before.
Yeah. That's good. I'm so glad that we our experiences are in parallel, on that, because I do have one or two students who have been very successful in GIS, and they got a job right out of college and that whole thing, but it was in GIS, right? They had full on double majors in archaeology and GIS. Like one of them worked for City of Ventura and that kind of thing.
And they are they're now, like, we have a couple in GIS that, now that we started this cultural practice a couple of years ago for the company that I work for, they're now coming out of the woodworks and they're like, I have a degree in archaeology. And the only reason I'm here is because it's like they're whispering, I'm here. Did I work for you guys? And, they're like, oh my goodness, I maybe I could actually use my degree. And so we do bring them in, and that's, we've worked with the GIS department to have them do our figures for us. And now, even in some instances that they're interested, we've been working with them to work on certain sections of reports and whatnot when they're maybe slow or just because they want to do that themselves for their own edification. But I think, GIS is it's different, and it's important that professors like yourself understand that it's an old thing, get your GIS along with your ARC. It's not what it was, and that's why it's important, like what you do and what Bill does, to just to make sure that you guys are, up to date on what the market bears. Yeah. So, I think in general, these engineering companies, like I was saying, and before we go on to the next segment, there are so many different opportunities for you to learn different aspects of different disciplines. And these different disciplines it's not like you're going to, now I'm going to be an acoustician. Now I'm going to be a noise specialist. No, you're just collecting the data for them. It actually is a much more efficient way of working in companies where you have people that are, multi-capable in collecting data so that the people that are actually the experts in noise can do what they do best. And that is the analysis, not going out doing readings that somebody else could do for them. So a few other, possibilities are drones. Drones are becoming more and more popular. And it's there's so many ways that they can be used and the data can be used. So if you are working for a company that has drone capabilities and has a drone program, it's something that interests you, I would put your hat in the ring, because it is something that can be used for archaeology, but it's like one of those things that you could collect all the data at one time that's needed that can also help archaeology. Now, the drone does take some work. You have to get your license. You have to go through a process. But if your company that you're working at currently is willing to invest that in you, do it. And it's something that you're interested in, because that is one thing. The more capabilities that you can collect as a professional that your company is willing to invest money into, do it every day. Do it. There should never be a no for that, because if they're willing to pay for that learning process, that just helps you, whether you stay at the company or you move on. That's something that cannot be taken away from you. And it's not something that you want to pay for on your own. Drone, that can be expensive. Another thing is, if a company is willing to have you take HasWhopper, whether you need it or not, do it. Every time, do it.
Yep.
Because that's expensive to get on your own. And people sometimes, especially if you're as needed, if there's a company that's willing to pay you to take your HasWhopper, absolutely do it, because that's something that makes you more employable to other companies when you're moving on, or if you're, as needed across the board. So with that, we'll go on to the next segment and talk about small companies. Welcome back to CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 333. And we're talking today about expanding your skill set outside of archaeology to be more relevant inside of archaeology and capable of keeping yourself billable in companies, large and small. We were, talking about services in larger companies. So now let's talk about how can we be of service and expand our skill set in smaller companies. I'll start off with just saying, making sure that you, first of all, looking at the capabilities that you have, as an archaeologist, if you went through a program worth its salt, you should be pretty adept at Excel and potentially Access. You should be somewhat adept at, other platforms like, Word, Adobe.
I just want to quickly interject too. Get decently adept if you're an Apple computer user, get good at PCs, and vice versa. That always helps. Good
point. So where can this all seems kind of rudimentary, but the more that you can do, the more you can open up, because Excel, there's so much. There's knowing how to work in Excel, but then there's so many others. I remember at the last firm I was in, we started having people train on pivot tables in Excel. And, there's tutorials that you can take online. It's not, when you're a little slow, you can take those online. Always be looking to be proactive to increase and to build your skill set and increase the skills and improve the skills you already have. So be proactive. That's what's going to make you valuable. Don't be sitting around waiting for somebody to tell you to do it. If you're slow, go find ways to make yourself more capable. And so, how does that help a small company outside of archaeology? Well, small companies, you have owners, you want to I tell my young people that sometimes I mentor, or my kids, I'm like, you just want to make your boss's job easier. And I don't think people realize, you just don't know. Your boss has been where you are, likely, but you've never been where they've been. So you don't know how difficult their job is. So you want to make, this, sometimes I hear this concept, these stupid videos that are on like LinkedIn and whatnot, where it's saying, it's always the younger employees that know so much more than the older employees. Well, you do, from a technological perspective, you may have a better handle on how to use certain tools. Absolutely. Because your boss hasn't been taking Excel classes to keep up on that, because that's not their role. That's your role. Your role is to keep their job easier, to make their life easier. And so that they can get freed up to work on the aspects of their job and their role that is a better use of their time, because they have institutional knowledge, they have management knowledge, they have a lot more knowledge than you have. And that's the knowledge you want to gain. So the more successful you, and the more you take off of their plate, the more they can work on what they really should be doing as a manager or an owner of a company or whatever. And then you know what you get to do? You get to watch that. You get to learn from them. But if they're having to go and open up and do like Excel and all this kind of stuff, formatting reports, that's not a good use of their time. And if they're not doing what they are uniquely what they should be doing in their role, you're not able to watch them do that in their role. And that's what you want. You want to be able to watch management at all levels do what they should be doing so that you know what that takes to get to their position. So, how can you take that off of their plate? Your knowledge in Excel can help them with their budgets, can help them, you can help organize them. Trust me, I call it hair on fire. Like they're wearing so many different hats that it's just so hard for them. If you can help organize them, do it. If you can help, format reports, do it. If you are a whiz at Adobe, Illustrator, or whatever, do whatever you can to make their job and anyone else's job easier. That doesn't mean you're going to work your way out of archaeology. There's a balance there. But if they know that you're going to be there and you can help them, it just makes you so much more valuable as an employee.
Yep. Even in the classroom world, I've had students of mine totally help me with like an Excel spreadsheet for the catalog, right? For the artifact catalog. And they just happen to know Excel really well. And it's like, Heather, it's like you're saying, it's like that hair on fire thing. When I have a student who I know just knows how to do it, it makes me relax more. I'm like, okay, they can do that. And it's cool. And it's one less thing that I have to like stress over and try and figure out at 11 at night, like it's just great. I've also, as we've been talking, I was just thinking of other just sort of little niche knowledge buckets, that you may have in my own experience, stuff that sort of helped me, little knowledge things in archaeology. I didn't know much about shell for a long time, but working on a shellman with my class, I realized fairly recently, I'm like, wait, I know a lot about shell now, right? I would have never called myself like an archaeologist who knows marine shell, but now I know a lot. I would say it might help all of us to almost write a list of like buckets of knowledge you happen to have, and then as Heather's saying, be proactive about it and really try and be savvy about how this stuff relates directly to archaeology, right? The shell one is obvious. I'll also say in my life, many of you have probably heard me talk about scuba diving and this kind of stuff. And sure, I can go, well, I was scuba diving in Belize in the cenotes, but for a California archaeology firm, they're going to be like, nobody cares, so who cares if I scuba dive in Belize?
You could have maybe you're going this direction. You have, more and more now, you have marine biologists that might need help collecting data. And that's, maybe they have one marine biologist, nobody else. That's one thing. Scuba diving, like that's something that takes a long time to get your license and get certified or whatever you call it. And so if you, in a smaller company, they have a marine biologist, but they need more than one person out there, you could go there and, assist the marine biologist in collecting whatever data they need.
Yeah,
because that is
exactly where I was going. So I guess my thunder was just stolen. There it was.
Sorry.
There it goes. It's funny. No, but so what I decided to do, and this is several years back, but I got this thing called Reef Check, which is where locally they run a class on like the local like marine environment. And it was actually pretty tough, right? I had to learn about all the fish types and all that kind of stuff. And it was very biologically related, right? But it was great. So I can tell them, I don't just go, so there I was in Belize doing scuba diving. I can be like, hey, I was Reef Check certified for local underwater environment. And then that is obviously much more lucrative. But I did that because I'm very conscious and very proactive about, okay, how does this scuba diving skill set, how can I use that in California, right? So I did that. And then one other one, I grew up in a 1920s craftsman house. So at first, if somebody asked me, do you know about 1920s architecture? I'm like, no. But then if I think about it, I'm like, wait, yes. I know exactly what those doorknobs look like because I turned one for the first 18 years of my life. I know craftsman houses really well. So think about your own, personal life experience. And do you have funny little very in-depth knowledge? that you can build out because you already have that platform, right? Can you build it out and use and focus it more towards archaeology?
That's a really good example is assisting with the architectural historians. So if you have a smaller company, they may be able to afford one architectural historian, but you're an archaeologist, so you can, any chance you get to, because it used to be like archaeologists way back when would just collect the data, and a lot of them didn't even go to school for architectural history, right?
Oh yeah.
So they would, or maybe they took a few classes and that was good enough to have them be the architectural historian. And that's not the case really anymore. But, when you do these surveys, the companies, a lot of times the smaller companies for these cities, because it's a DBE, will get the survey, the architectural survey, but they need somebody to come with them because they're a lot of work. So any chance you get to help architectural historian, that builds your skill set, but it also keeps you billable. So that's something else that you can do. And anytime you can put that on a resume, because architectural is just one of those tough, like we don't hire a bunch of architectural historians like we do archaeologists. And so there's not a lot of them out there. And so being able to serve in that role where you're assisting an actual architectural historian is key.
Yeah.
Another one is, just going back to archaeology would be geoarchaeology is becoming more and more required in different states. So expanding your skill set, having an opportunity to work next to an actual geoarchaeologist is key. It's really going to position you very well. So I would definitely, if you ever have a true geoarchaeologist that is on your team where you work, get in lockstep with them. Do everything you can to learn as much as you can. Another opportunity is geophysical. So the GPR and any of the other technologies that go along with it, that's another area that you can expand your skill set. And if you have a company that's willing to put you through training for GPR, do it. Don't even think about it. Just do it. And so, to wrap this up, I highly suggest you if you're working for a smaller company, then just go to a larger company and look at their services and what they provide. And I'm looking at the company that I work at right now, and I can tell you almost every single one of these services that are listed are services that there's some kind of component, except for civil. But there's some, and maybe even there's something, I just don't know a whole lot about civil, but there is something in every one of these services that you could help with that would help the company, keep you billable, but also expand your capabilities. And you know what? Not that we're trying to get anybody out of archaeology, but you never know. You go to school for archaeology, you love archaeology, and then you stumble across another opportunity. You're like, oh my goodness, I didn't even know this existed. And that's what building your career is all about. So that you may actually be introduced to something that you want to do even more than archaeology.
Right. And I just want to double down on, we've been talking about that you can be the assistant to these guys, that you can help these guys. And that's great, right? Not only is it a great first step, a great opportunity to learn these new skills and stuff, it also means that you're still hired while everyone's laid off in November. You know what I mean? Yep.
Yeah. And it's a key way of investing in your career if you are an as needed and transitioning to full time.
Yeah.
And just remember, just like you want the company to invest in you as an as needed, and that doesn't happen a lot. It happens at our company. I make sure that's the case, but you need to invest in them as well. And you know what you're going to get from that? You're going to get skill sets, you're going to get experience, and you're going to be able to show what you're made of to them. So, whether I hear people say, well, they should invest in me before I'm going to invest in them. Listen, you're going to get so much out of it. You get out what you put in anything in life. So put into any opportunity that you have, and you will get it back in spades. And you'll be able to. Are you trying to
say the love you take is equal to the love you make?
Yes.
I get it.
With that, I think that's a perfect way to end this episode. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you in the field. Not necessarily the archaeology field. Maybe it's the geology field.
That's right.
But we'll see you in the field. Thanks for listening. Goodbye.
Bye.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at archpodnet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about.
Thanks for listening to this podcast. The Archaeology Podcast Network's chief editor is Rachel Roden. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy. Our social media and newsletter coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht. The APN was founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle on December 1st, 2014. We're supported by our amazing podcast hosts, many volunteers, and listeners like you. Check out membership at www.archpodnet.com/members.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.